Hello, with tales from the Economicon. I am the Economancer, or something. Today we're going to be doing entrepreneurship. This voice is kind of difficult and hurts my throat, so we're not going to do it anymore. So, today's not going to be the vlog that I wanted to do on Veblen. Today's going to be about entrepreneurship, and the reason I'm going into this is, one, entrepreneurship helps explain a lot of inequality. And especially after we just went over, trickle-down theory in economics, I figured the next jump-off point for helping explain some of the, inequality in society is definitely entrepreneurship. It's extremely important. So, with that being said, oh, my hair don't look too bad. A little bit of beard grooming. Feels good. I need personal hairdresser. Would be nice. Beard's going crazy. Anyway, so the reason why I've called this neo-Schumpeterian forces of regional economics is, first, a lot of this is based on the regional economics, right? So when we think of the micro to macro scale, you can kind of have this in-between idea, how can we apply the micro to the macro and vice versa. Regional economics is really the place where we set this off. With that being said, another reason is you can't talk about entrepreneurship without talking about Schumpeter. If you even mention entrepreneurship, Schumpeter's goes to standing behind you, judging you because you're probably, getting it wrong from his point of view. Now, with that being said, this is kind of the breakdown of what I want to go into. We're going to go into the introduction. We're going to go into 3 of the neoclassical ideas behind entrepreneurship. Then we're going to go into neo-Schumpeterian dynamics. This is a mathematical formulation. Schumpeterian engine of endogenous technical change. So kind of give you a breakdown of what that looks like. Spatial theories of regional entrepreneurship. How does this work in growth, and how do developers kind of utilize these ideas? Intro. That's a really redundant thing. We'll keep going. All right, so essentially we have 3 neoclassical ideas of entrepreneurship. You've got Schumpeter, Knight, and Kerzner. Even though a lot of people don't look at Knight very often, they typically talk about Schumpeter and Kerzner. I completely disagree. So Schumpeter had concocted the hypothesis of creative destruction, and it's most bare form. So imagine you're in an economy, and now we've kind of come to this conclusion later on in life, but back in the day, everybody thought we had perfect equilibrium, right? So as the profit-seeking mechanism, people were coming in and joining into the forces until the economic profit became 0. This is perfect competition. That doesn't really happen. And Schumpeter had pointed this out years and years and years ago. And what he had said is that, once these things go into monopolies or oligopolies, the only way to bust up these monopolies and oligopolies is the entrance of new technologies or new production possibility frontiers. And so that's what he said. He said, essentially, as everything agglomerates, we have this new entrance by this entrepreneur who has these radical ideas, smashes through, breaks up the monopolies, and then, due to patents, property rights, and stuff like that, he becomes the monopolist until something else comes through. We can think of this in books, right? So Barnes & Nobles and a lot of these bookstores had a monopoly on, large retail bookstores had a large monopoly, oligopoly on books until Amazon eventually overtook them and killed them in their sleep of years of running, serious deficits. Anyway, Knight had hypothesized that entrepreneurs were the bearer of social and economic uncertainty, as entrepreneurs deliberately constrain their consumption to free up their resources and release their attention for the pursuit of economic gains. Knight had also hypothesized that entrepreneurs were also a function of social change. So as an entrepreneur, your function isn't just chasing, economic gains. It's also chasing social gains. And we've actually seen a lot of this in our lives. A lot of these, I guess you could say, green companies and stuff like that. That's a function of Knightian entrepreneurship and the uncertainty and risk that we face in society. Now, Kerzner had noticed that many entrepreneurs provided essential within industry change. So many of the production improvements came from the entrepreneurs without changing the end product much. So going back to Knight, that's this social change, this uncertainty bearing mechanism from the entrepreneur is really rather important, and it's highly looked over in regional as well as other types of economics. And that's just a function of Knight being Knight. Neo-Schumpeterian dynamics. Okay, so this is a mathematical formulation that comes from Giovanni Dosi, and it's used in the formulation of agent-based modeling, which is a counterpart to dynamic stochastic general equilibrium modeling, which again are just a bunch of words. But essentially, you kind of create a math system where you have, people that you can calibrate, and then how those people interact in the system as like nodes is kind of how we look at what's going on. And so this like simple entry-exit system with the parameters human action conditioned on behavioral economics rather than, the neoclassical Homo economicus. This has been very insightful in how the system equilibrates under Schumpeter's creative destruction. Now, in his work, Giovanni Dosi typically has like a demand management side that's Keynesian. So he kind of has like the supply side as being very Schumpeterian, and then that demand side being very Keynesian. Now, how that works, so far from what I've read of his work, it's worked out pretty well. Schumpeterian engine of endogenous change, technical change. It's technically a change. Okay, so we're looking at this firm level feedback. And so we have this micro foundation model from that agent-based modeling that I was giving you earlier. And then we have this macro model. And then we're allowing for this Schumpeterian and knowledge spillover theory of entrepreneurship. And the knowledge spillover theory of entrepreneurship is saying that, because these entrepreneurs are coming in, they're breaking up stuff, and they're being awesome, their knowledge gets to spill over into the other industries as well as to people. And we've seen that this has been essential in, macroeconomics in looking at the divergence in growth between the rich countries and poor countries, is this knowledge spillover as well as the Schumpeterian engine that's pushing forth growth. So if you think about it this way, when we're looking at the differences in growth paths between, poor countries and rich countries, or if you want to go there, the West versus, the East Bloc European countries, a lot of it is, the West has a lot more entrepreneurship. It has a lot better, formulations of spilling over this knowledge that comes from these entrepreneurs. And that gives you a very, very good indication of the differences in growth and why they're diverging, when kind of the old idea was assuming that, all growth paths would converge at some point, because we're assuming that knowledge spills over kind of equally throughout the world. But, that doesn't seem to be the case. You can look more into the knowledge spillover theory of entrepreneurship in Lattacher et al. 2021. It's a very, very good paper that goes into it. Spatial theories of regional entrepreneurship. So, this may sound crazy to everybody, but for a good amount of time, economists didn't think like other humans. Crazy, I know. And so when we're talking about like real estate or venture capitalism or anything along those lines, everyone knows the old adage, location, location, location. So it's not without reason that there needs to be, spatial theories of entrepreneurship. So obviously the spatial context will matter under the entrepreneurial context. So we're looking at this study about London. And what we've seen in this is that entrepreneurs have a significant impact on housing prices, and that entrepreneurs spatially concentrates based on distance and time from the growth center of London. That's amazing. Further, in the context of like the regional area, we think of it as like an ecosystem. So a lot of the literature focuses on what an ecosystem for an entrepreneur looks like. Now, in the case of Mack and Mayer 2016, we see that they're adding additional support for this evolutionary perspective. And this is similar to what Dosi has. So they think that there's an evolving state of entrepreneurship within areas based on this time and distance from the growth center. And then there's Malachi 2018 does a large review of the literature, as you know, and it's looking at the operations and the concepts behind some of the entrepreneurial ecosystems. And this is what like regional developers typically look at. They're like, how does this intersect with what I'm trying to do as a regional developer? Growth. Does it actually matter for growth? Do you absolutely have to have it? If you seen earlier about the differences in divergence of growth, you would think that it would. Now, essentially in Lattacher, I'm probably butchering that name, the relationship between growth and research and development is hump-shaped. That's a weird way to put it, but inverted U. So at one point it's increasing, at another point it gets to the highest amount of point, and then it decreases. And so what he's saying is that when entrepreneurs appropriate too little rents from innovation, which means they're not making enough from the innovations that's happening from the research and development, too few resources are allocated to entrepreneurship, and the returns to the research and development are low because of the lack of entrepreneurial skills. So we have to think about this like, wow, all of this research and development, all these new technologies are coming out. You know, if you've ever talked to an engineer, they'll tell you, you know, I have to be able to utilize this. So if there's no way to actually utilize all the research and development, and that's because you don't have entrepreneurs out there, you know, changing up the game, then that research and development doesn't do anything. And so to motivate this, innovation should be promoted by encouraging entrepreneur rather than just pure research. Thus, entrepreneur is considered the primary driver of regional economic growth that not only promotes the innovation and fosters the technological process, but also fosters how society is trying to implement these different research and developed ideas. So, you know, the technology is useless if it can't be brought to everyone else. And then we see in Simon et al., we see the validation of Knight's social progress hypothesis of entrepreneurs. Because ultimately we know that entrepreneurs plays a vital role in regional economic growth. They have knowledge spillovers, they're directing technology, and being the engine of social change. In my opinion, these Schumpeterian or Kerzner forces are the most important tools for a regional developer to input in their local economy. As well as the Knightian influence that, you know, this social progress, this social change is fundamental to an entrepreneur because he's the one who's going to go out there to change the world. He's bringing, you know, green into our reality. He's bringing, you know, I guess you could say free range food and all of these things. Now, some of it might be misappropriated and he may be doing this purely to seek a profit, but ultimately, even if one person's doing it bad, it may invite the people that want to do things actually for good. And so ultimately you're having, you know, good things happen because of entrepreneurs. Now, developers application. So we're looking at new business development and small business and entrepreneurial business development. New business development means, you know, you're really trying to bring in new businesses. Small business and entrepreneurial business development means, okay, so we have these small businesses that are in here already. How can we bring them, up to speed? What can we do to make them more dynamic? And that's the entrepreneurial business development. And these are the two types of ideas that local developers are trying to implement. So most recently in Liu et al. 2021, the findings showed that the improvement of participants' entrepreneurial competencies, hard word, the reduction of entrepreneurial barriers, and the change of entrepreneurial intention reflect the effectiveness of entrepreneurial education for college students. So if we want to bring in more entrepreneurs or understand entrepreneurship more, you probably need to bring it into colleges. And it doesn't necessarily mean just to be a major for college, because many colleges have this as a major, but it also needs to be brought into, general education, go into what it takes to be an entrepreneur, how entrepreneurship exists, what can you do to facilitate entrepreneurs, even if you don't want to be one. Further, in Salisu 2020, the author notes a decline in entrepreneurship on the periods of 2015 to 2018. But by the enhancement through effective entrepreneurial training and government entrepreneurial supports, there's a significant indirect path effect. So essentially, what he's saying is, in Africa, they started having a large decline in entrepreneurship, and they were like, what do we do? So they started having, more entrepreneurial trainings, village to village, as well as in the colleges. And then they also had more governmental support. So being like, okay, if you want to start a business, we'll help you out. Better tax cuts, as well as, maybe lump sum changes. And this saw an increase in overall entrepreneurship. And I think that's kind of a good thing. And it's something that, all local and regional developers really need to think about, is how can we capture this effect? Now, there's a different but a large review of the entrepreneurial ecosystem by Robertson et al. In 2020. The analysis offers a map of the covered territory and facilitates the identification and gaps under researched areas in the field. And this has a particular focus on public sector interaction. I'm going to go through. Here are the references. I will put them in the link down below. Now, how does this play into inequality? And why do I bring this up? Well, if you have a lot of entrepreneurship, you're going to have a lot of different outcomes. And the reason why this is because not all entrepreneurs are meant to be entrepreneurs. Not all entrepreneurs survive. And not all entrepreneurship actually is useful. So as you're just pumping out entrepreneurs, that's not necessarily going to work. So I think in the United States, it's something like 3 to 5% of businesses survive the first 5 years. That's kind of hard to deal with as an idea, because a lot of it's in restaurants and stuff like that. Whereas what is the actual number of major impact entrepreneurship? Does that actually survive, or does it break down? We don't really have those numbers well put together, but what we do know is that people who are putting in large amounts of capital to become entrepreneurs, they're either going to fail and lose a large amount of capital, or they're going to win and get a large amount of capital in return. That automatically sets you up for an unequal distribution in wealth and status and party, because we're talking about that public sector interaction. If you have a corrupt public sector, then you're going to have, more differences in outcomes, and that could be party affiliated. We kind of live in a very diametrically opposed society these days. So it's not hard to see that, if I'm looking at my local council and they're all Republican or they're all Democrat, if they're all Republican, if I'm trying to bring in these green jobs and stuff like that, and trying to upheave, the local coal industry or gas industry, they're very likely going to be like, nah, bruh, nah. And if I'm, if it's a democratically controlled sector, I would be hard pressed to find, the idea that I'm going to, do an entrepreneurial training on, let's say, like getting rid of critical theory or reteaching, classical works or something like that. They're going to be like, no, we can't do that. We have these certain expectations. So that might be an issue, as well as, just straight up money changing hands. If your homeboy is on the council, you're more likely to get something. So we already have this status and this party built into it. And then when it comes to, economic inequality, without, the government doing some of these lump sums or making it a lot easier for it, yeah, absolutely. You're going to have inequality in that regard as well. And that goes into that intergenerational mobility as well as entrepreneurial mobility in the United States, which for all intents and purposes, it's actually pretty high in comparison to other countries. I mean, especially when you compare it to, I don't know, India, as well as, even Western European countries such as the UK or France. You're not going to have nearly as much entrepreneurship in those places as you do in the United States. So those are things to think about. And obviously, because you're having such dynamic change in an economy, you're also going to have, differences in economic outcomes between groups. Now, there's a lot to say about, I guess you could say, critical theory in regards to this, whether there's, gender or racial stratification in entrepreneurship. There may be. I haven't really seen any good literature on this idea, but it very well may exist. And I don't know necessarily why it would exist, I guess, because if you're bringing a product to the market that's better than everyone else's, whether it's cheaper or just actually better or it changes lives, I don't think anybody cares what you look like. But again, that may be my own biases because I don't care. So take that for what it's worth. But ultimately, this is an important part of that trickle-down theory, as well as it's an important part of looking at inequality in society and how all of these things interact, intersect, and stuff like that. So this has been the Economancer. I hope you enjoyed this. Like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you want down in the comments below on the next one. This one was kind of fun. A lot of work got put into it. So, yeah. Thank you and have a good day.